Good morning. Welcome back to 8th grade social studies. I know you're pumped and jacked to be here. I realized something yesterday that I am actually a lot taller on audio than I am in real life. So I'm trying not to disappoint you when we walk back into this building eventually. I'll have my mask on, so that may make me look taller, but I'm just not. So yesterday, your first kind of like normal homework assignment was to read through some slides. We are again perfecting a way to make that as clear as possible. So it took 27 pictures from me to send to you, but I may try to keep making this a little bit better as we go through. But your homework question, number one, was explain the Missouri Compromise. So the best answer I can give you, because this will be kind of like a short answer portion of your test that we will eventually have in person. So when you're looking at, to the best of your ability, explain it and use a bunch of words. Generally, the more words you use, the ones are going to be there that I'm going to key on. So if we're looking at the Missouri Compromise, I'll pull this down here. These were some of the things that you could include. So it was proposed by a guy named Henry Clay, which would preserve the balance. Oh gosh, I didn't spell very well today, sorry. Between the slave states and the free states. At this point, we had 22 states in the Union. So the issue would kind of be what to do with Missouri. So as we're looking at these kind of heated things, there are, of course, there are slaves at this point in Missouri, in history, I should say, and countering the balance because there's some farmland in Missouri. They need these laborers, and I think that was a POD that we had a couple of days ago. Striking the balance between slave states and free states, it's kind of what they wanted. They needed in the Deep South a lot of laborers. They didn't have tractors, they didn't have mechanization, so they needed a cheap labor force, and slaves were the way that they were going to make money as well as be profitable on big plantations in the South. So as we're expanding westward, Missouri was one of the first kind of tipping points. In 1819, this started to come up, and if we're going to add a state here, we need to add a state that would be a free state versus a slave state. So tipping points, as we look at this, it was a negotiation a lot of the time. So eventually, the Missouri Compromise divided up free states versus slave states. The next one, Henry Clay, who was a big architect of the Missouri Compromise, he proposed to limit states based on latitude lines. So if we had a big globe in front of us, so these are lines of latitude and longitude. We're looking at the latitude lines right now. These are the ones that kind of like the rungs of a ladder go up. So as you're looking at latitude, longitude, right now we're focused on just the latitude, and we measure away from the equator. So if we're looking at north latitude, means it's north of the equator, south latitude means south of the equator. So the line that was proposed by this compromise was a little bit further south than some people cared. So 36, if we're counting in between here, and this is something that we'll have to do. So 39 would be there, and 38. I'm a really good artist. And 37 and 36. So if we're looking at 36 and a half, I can draw a straight line really well. So this would be almost the line right there that we're proposing. Now, he proposes this line to go above. The northern half would be free states, the southern half would be slave states, in specifically the Louisiana Purchase. So we just kind of drew that line 2 lines ago. So if we're looking at where that was, it was slightly south of this line. Now, if you look at this map, it kind of makes it difficult because it's a different type of projection. So when we look at this line on the map here, they suggest everything here be slave states and free states, and Missouri kind of falls right there in the middle. This line looks crooked compared to some of our states that are straight across there, north and south. But you kind of get the idea. They had to come up with a balance when we have these new territories, so they would ultimately rest and we would be kind of even when it comes to deciding whether you're going to be a free state or slave state. Another line pre-Civil War that we'll be talking to at some point is the Mason-Dixon line, which is relatively north of that 36-degree mark that Mr. Clay was talking about. So this would divide slave states and free states. And as we look at these states that, again, needed it for geography or needed it for farming and agricultural purposes, based on their geography, I should say, these were some of the things that they are debating about in Congress. So, as we're looking at Henry Clay here, 36 degrees, 30 minutes north is how we would read that. But again, until you're making maps for a living, you may not use that. But occasionally we'll be looking at latitude, longitude lines in class. Number 3 is also related. Explain the slogan Free Soil Party and what that means. Well, it was a new political party that, as you guessed it, was talking about free stuff and free men and free labor. So this political party kind of got some steam during this time period in the election of 1848. So we're kind of looking at how we should divide and whether slavery should be allowed or not allowed. So this debate is kind of waging and raging in Congress, and they're getting very fired up because they feel like, as the Supreme Court ruled in the Dred Scott decision, that hey, this is a slave is actually a piece of your property, and the Constitution cannot take away your property. So it became a real debate. They didn't even see slaves as human beings at the time. So this was a problem. A lot of people are going to merge in this and be divided. They'd be divided between families, and they'd be divided between what they believed and what they thought was right. The next one, number 4, we are kind of predicting the future. And as we're foreshadowing, I guess is a word that you might use in literature class at some point, the word secede. So seceding in our concept means to break away from. So we're already kind of talking about, because the chapter is entitled The Road to the Civil War, Southern states are going to not, I guess, get their way. And as the politics behind slavery is leaning toward, hey, we're going to abolish slavery in the land, this causes Southern states to secede or break away from the Union. Now, Southern people might say it's not really over slavery. They might say it's over states' rights. It's the state's right to decide whether you're going to be a free state or a slave state, not the federal government. So it is an extremely divisive issue, and one that we will be kind of even talking about today, as we'll try to link these into some current events with the rhetoric of what's going on in the world today, and how do we determine what's right and what's wrong. All right, next thing, Compromise of 1850. So as we're looking at another Henry Clay's plan here, the compromise is going to, again, be focused on what we should do with these new states. So they were actually a series of 5 separate bills that passed through Congress, which would be a final settlement. And I use the word final settlement there in quotation marks because, as we know, about a decade later, we would still be debating over North versus South and free state versus slave state. And then up to 14 years later, we'd still be fighting in the Civil War, fighting over free states and slave states. So this was just kind of a brief homework assignment. For in-class purposes, it may be a little bit longer, but if you look at how the more you write, the more points I can give you, you're going to get more points, especially on a short answer question of a test. So thanks for listening today. I'll talk to you soon.